trust, fear, and the role of oxytocin and cortisol in hospitality teams. Introduction. In the high-pressure world of hospitality, leaders face a choice every day. Create a culture driven by fear, or foster one built on trust. How a leader speaks, reacts, or even just walks into a room can change the mood of an entire team. That's because leadership doesn't only influence systems and schedules, it shapes emotions, energy, and behavior. Whether you're managing a reception team, a kitchen brigade, or floor team, the emotional climate you create directly affects how your team thinks, feels, and performs. This isn't just about creating the right work environment. It's about understanding the biology behind human behavior to build the most resilient, cohesive, and high-performing teams. Two key hormones, oxytocin and cortisol, play a major role in how people respond to leadership and interact with each other. These chemical messengers shape our ability to trust, cooperate, solve problems, and stay calm under pressure. In simple terms, oxytocin supports trust and connection. Cortisol triggers stress and fear. This chapter explores how hospitality leaders can either fuel stress and reduce performance, or build trust and increase teamwork simply by the way they lead. Understanding these biological drivers helps leaders not just manage more effectively, but lead more humanely and sustainably, especially in an industry where emotional labor and team cohesion are critical. Oxytocin, the trust hormone. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone or bonding chemical. It's released in the brain in response to acts of social bonding, touch, and eye contact. From an evolutionary standpoint, oxytocin has been fundamental in developing high levels of social sensitivity in humans, allowing communities of individuals to thrive while working together as a cohesive unit. It enhances the ability to recognize and respond to social cues, fostering empathy and social interactions. It promotes trust in others and increases willingness to cooperate, strengthens the bond between individuals, creates a sense of emotional safety, and it's hugely effective in reducing stress. In hospitality settings, where teamwork is essential and guest service relies on emotional skills, oxytocin-rich environments encourage more authentic and supportive interactions, both amongst the staff, encouraging teamwork, and with guests, nurturing genuine hospitality. Oxytocin is essentially a self-produced drug, and like any other drug, it's addictive. Picture this scenario. You are walking down the street, and a few steps ahead of you, someone drops their wallet. You pick it up and then sprint to catch up with them and hand them their wallet. You have just done something for them, an act of care, and they feel gratitude. They look you in the eye, shake your hand, and thank you. This creates a bond and releases oxytocin in both the giver and the receiver. The giver had a big rush of oxytocin, a fuzzy, warming feeling, like the feeling you get when giving a present to someone. The receiver also had a small release of oxytocin, and they start looking for another fix of this powerful drug. That person is now 10 times more likely to perform an act of selfless kindness towards someone else before the day ends, all to get another oxytocin rush. And this goes further. Even someone on the other side of the road, witnessing the exchange, will benefit from a small release of oxytocin, and they will, on average, be 3 times more likely to perform an act of kindness themselves. This explains why it often takes just a small act of altruism or a kind gesture in a work environment to kickstart a chain reaction, which has the power to ripple through the whole team and transform the way everyone works together and looks after each other. Not everyone reacts to oxytocin to the same extent, though, so building a team with the right mix of people, more susceptible to the positive effects of altruistic gestures, is key to maximize this powerful hormone's effect. Cortisol, the stress hormone. Imagine a group of antelopes grazing peacefully in a clearing. Each animal appears relaxed, but the environment remains unpredictable, and each antelope remains alert, ready to sense any danger. At some point, one antelope detects a faint, ambiguous sign of danger, perhaps the rustle of a predator in the tall grass. The signal may be unclear, but the survival instinct kicks in, and the animal's brain interprets it as potentially threatening. This activates the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands, initiating a biological stress response. Within seconds, cortisol is released into the bloodstream. The effects of cortisol are immediate. The antelope's heart rate increases. Glucose is released into the bloodstream to provide readily available energy. Sensory awareness is heightened. To conserve all energy for the immediate threat, different systems are shut down, including the reproductive, the immune, and the digestive systems, reserving all resources for fight or flight. But the effect goes further. The antelopes change in posture, sudden stillness or tension, and even shifts in body odor due to biochemical changes act as non-verbal cues to the rest of the herd. These cues trigger similar HPA axis activation in other antelopes, even if they have not directly perceived the threat themselves. In this way, cortisol becomes a social signal, preparing the group for collective action, typically flight, increasing the chances of survival of every individual in the group. This phenomenon demonstrates that stress is not only individual, it is highly contagious in group settings. This trait was therefore naturally selected in social animals over millennia, as those most likely to survive and to pass on their genes were those more sensitive to cortisol, especially when released in other individuals. This explains why even individual acts of fear, like a public reprimand or threat to a single member of staff, can increase the stress response of an entire group of people, and why, as a leader, it is extremely important to control the cortisol levels in a team. Excess of cortisol also disrupts the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for decision-making, problem-solving, and memory recall. That's why the stress of speaking in public can make your mind go blank, making you forget things that you could easily recall while rehearsing, or why one mistake under pressure can easily lead to a chain of subsequent mistakes. And we've all had one of those days. Today, I cannot seem to get anything right. That's cortisol clouding your brain. One experiment performed on rats gave us a powerful insight on the role of cortisol on our ability to learn and perform. In a laboratory environment, 2 small rat houses were set up. Entering the door of house A would deliver to the rat being tested a small electrical current. Entering the door of house B wouldn't. When the electrical shock was barely perceptible, it would take rats quite a few attempts to learn that they had to avoid house A and prefer house B instead. When the shock was amped up from barely noticeable to mildly uncomfortable, the added stress increased the learning speed of the rats, who would now only take a few tries to learn they had to stay away from house A. Curiously, when the shock was increased enough to be actually painful, causing stress and fear in the rats just at the thought of entering a door, their ability to learn from the experience would actually reverse and regress, worsening rather than improving. They would now enter house A more times than they did when the shock was just uncomfortable, proving that an excess of cortisol actively impairs the activity of the prefrontal cortex and the ability to learn, perform, and recall information. In small spikes, like those created by the expectation of a busy service ahead, cortisol can help sharpen the mind, improve focus, and boost motivation and productivity. On the other hand, chronic high levels of cortisol, like those promoted by an environment of fear, punishment, and micromanagement, will have a host of detrimental effects, resulting in reduced memory and attention. Staff forget orders, miss details, or just struggle focusing. Poor decision-making, staff rush choices, or feel paralyzed by minor issues. Lower emotional control. It's harder to stay calm when a guest is rude or a team member slips up, as the fight or flight response promotes aggression. Every man for himself. The survival instinct kicks in. People stop cooperating and working as a team, as they just turn inwards, trying to survive the shift. Weakened empathy. Cortisol can inhibit oxytocin. Service becomes disengaged, cold, robotic, and team members start snapping at each other. Long-term health issues. The action of cortisol, which shuts down the digestive and immune systems, can result in recurrent health problems and frequent absences. Hospitality example. Imagine being a barista, working under a manager who micromanages every movement, shouts at you in front of other colleagues, and never acknowledges effort. You're constantly bracing for the next reprimand. Over time, you stop smiling, stop collaborating with others, and start making simple mistakes. That's not a lack of skill or a problem with your attitude. That's cortisol in action. How leadership behaviors shape brain chemistry. Leaders influence brain chemistry every day, often without realizing it. The tone of your voice, how you give feedback, and how much autonomy you allow, these are all signals that the brain interprets as either safe, trust, or threatening, fear. In an environment driven by fear, it is extremely difficult for humans to perform at high levels when the only aim is not to disappoint someone. Motivation starts lacking, and soon people realize that they don't need to give 100%. If criticism is all they ever receive from their managers, all they need to do is the bare minimum to stay out of trouble. People do their best to become invisible. They avoid taking initiative, and productivity plummets. Meanwhile, in an environment driven by trust, people who feel supported can and will perform at the highest levels for longer periods of time. When we admire someone and we look up to them and we know praise will come when deserved, we are much more inclined to do everything we can to make their vision come true. When the aim is to make someone proud of us, we will always perform at the very best of our abilities. Now, if we want to promote oxytocin, we need to create an environment that feels safe, personal and trusting. For example, greeting your team members by name, shaking hands while making eye contact, and showing genuine interest in how they're doing. All of these behaviors send signals of social safety. When you delegate tasks with confidence, without hovering or micromanaging, you're essentially saying, "I trust you." And that's a strong oxytocin trigger. Celebrating small wins together, thanking someone sincerely for their work, or even sharing a laugh in a meeting. Those positive, authentic moments of connection create oxytocin-rich environments. When people feel emotionally supported, when they know their opinion matters, or when leaders are transparent and consistent, that sense of trust grows and oxytocin flows. On the other hand, when it comes to cortisol, things get very different. Cortisol rises when people feel unsafe, scrutinized, or unsupported. So if a manager constantly changes expectations without communication, gives harsh, public, or constantly negative feedback, or creates a culture of blame, those behaviors trigger the brain's threat response. If employees feel like they're constantly being watched, or that failure will lead to embarrassment or the loss of their job, their bodies respond with cortisol, and this spreads like wildfire. Even silence from leadership, when it's perceived as withdrawal, coldness, or simple stonewalling, can elevate stress. So can unrealistic deadlines, poor work-life boundaries, or a lack of recognition. These are things that keep people in a low-grade state of anxiety, which is fueled by cortisol. So in a nutshell, trust, connection, kindness and transparency drive oxytocin. Uncertainty, fear, control and inconsistency drive cortisol. And as leaders or colleagues, we're constantly influencing which of these chemicals people are living with, sometimes just by how we say good morning, or whether we listen with attention or dismiss someone in a rush. And remember, even your own levels of cortisol can affect everyone around you, so it's hugely important for managers to control their own emotional state in the presence of their team. Hospitality is emotional work. You're not just serving food or checking in guests. You're managing expectations, reading moods, diffusing tension, and creating genuine moments of care. If your team is stressed, scared, or exhausted, the quality of service and, more importantly, of the hospitality you provide will drop, even if your systems are perfect. The best hospitality leaders know this. Leading with fear may create obedience. Leading with trust builds true hospitality.